Hello, everyone. My name is Jake Johnstone, and welcome to the Grit with Wisdom podcast. This is the podcast that aims to delve deep into the inner psyche and the mindsets of mountain bikers from all aspects of our sport in order to help you understand some of the tools, the tactics, and what it takes to push the boundaries of our sport from a mental and emotional perspective. Today on the show, we have a super interesting guest who is a professional mountain bike coach who also has a wealth of experience and training in the psychological aspect of mountain biking. Rafaela, or Roxy Wieschollek, who you may know as Roxy Bike or from her popular YouTube channel called Roxy's Ride and Inspire, is based in Mallorca, Spain. And she spends her time traveling Europe, coaching everyone from pure beginners all the way up to Olympic pros. She also just so happens to be one of the most impactful mentors I've had the pleasure of working with over the years. And today, she's going to sit down with me and share some knowledge and experiences that can help you improve your mental and emotional game on the bike. With no further ado, let's give a warm welcome to Roxy. Roxy, welcome to the Grit with Wisdom podcast. It's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jake.
No, I'm absolutely stoked to ask you all of these questions that have been burning away in my mind for a little while now. I know we were just chatting there. You've just got back from a jam-packed trip around Europe doing lots of coaching. I'd love to just kind of talk a little bit about that to get started here.
Yeah, totally right. I just returned from 2 months of coaching daily, and I'm back in Mallorca now. And as much as I love it, I do miss my cats. I miss my home. I miss learning myself. That's what I miss the most. So I'm super happy to be back and now digging my nose into, well, both creating content, but also consuming. I sometimes think of myself as a sponge, and I do notice that when I'm giving all the time, the sponge kind of dries out. And now it's time to make the sponge all nice and spongy again.
Totally. Yeah, that's a hectic chunk of work there, 2 months every day in a row. I can't even imagine how much of a toll that takes on you as well, kind of wearing you down. But it's so cool to hear that you've been out there spreading the joy so much. It's so cool. And who were you coaching? Was it people from kind of all walks of life, all areas, or specific people?
Yeah, definitely. Mainly hobby athletes, but also I coached a number of instructors and actually a German, one of the a pretty big actually German coaching firm. They asked me to coach their instructors, so that was also part of it. And apart from that, it was just my own camps which I give in summer, so all sorts of from beginner to advanced riders, and coaching them in all sorts of different aspects, both mentally and also physically. It was great fun and so amazing to see all the progress.
Wow, that's huge. So a whole lot of stoked faces all around Europe right now, I bet. Fantastic. Well, I'd love to start today for those that don't know you yet. I'd love if you could just start by maybe telling us a little bit about yourself and why it is that you ride mountain bikes.
That's a great question. Why is it that I ride mountain bikes? Well, I used to dance a lot and then I hurt my knee, so I couldn't dance anymore. So I was looking for a new sport, and that's basically how I got into mountain biking. And I've been a full-time mountain bike coach and a mental trainer and psychological counselor for over 12 years now. And the reason why I got into both coaching and also the mental aspect is because I had a kind of rough start. When I started riding, I had a super well-meaning coach who just said, "Hey, speed is your friend and follow my lead and you're going to be fine." And he just gave me some superficial tips, and then he took me to a pretty gnarly trail, and then I crashed pretty badly. And I was so embarrassed with my crash because I thought, how can it be that on my first ride, I kind of totally destroy myself? And after that, I was so scared of riding. Literally one little pebble, and I got off my bike and I pushed my bike and I walked it. And I thought, well, mountain biking is not my thing, maybe. And then after a while, I was like, no, this can't be it. So I love nature. I love riding in nature. I love understanding my sports equipment. So why is it that I crashed and what can I do against it? And that's how I started getting into coaching, because I took a lot of instruction myself, and then I started getting into the how to instruct part straight away, because I wanted to understand the why of why I crashed, how I can avoid it, and how mountain biking actually works, and how we can adhere to the laws of physics. And that's how I got into guiding and coaching pretty immediately, although I was still a beginner, and why I love it so much, and why I love it so much to help people with these fears, because I myself noticed when I started how much it limited me, and how actually close I was to not riding anymore, although it is such an amazing sport, because as I said, nature and everything it has to offer, and also the skills aspect of mountain biking, for me is magic, much more magic than riding on a road and just, filling up the kilometers or the miles. It's more about the experience and the immersion of myself into nature, and also into the challenge of learning skills.
Wow, I love that. Thank you for digging so deep there. It's so great to hear that story. And I think kind of right at the start that your first ride, it's such a relatable experience. For many of us out there on the trail, so many of us come across one of these well-meaning friends or maybe coaches without too much experience that do kind of give us some well-intentioned advice, but it doesn't necessarily set us up for success, like you explained there. So one, I'm so stoked that you stuck at it and that you found all of the great positive sides of mountain biking and of learning there as well. It's so cool to hear. The next question I was going to ask you was about what keeps you passionate and motivated when it comes to your riding and coaching. But I think, you've already hit the nail on the head there. It's kind of the nature and that thrill of learning new things. Is that right?
Definitely. It's the thrill of learning new things, and also embracing that struggle, embracing the discomfort of learning skills, that
Mm.
keeps me alive. And also what I love about it, and what I love giving people, that it's not easy. If you really want to keep learning, it's not an easy journey, but it will help us so much, even beyond mountain biking, if we start to lean into that discomfort, and if we start to embrace the struggle of learning new skills, of asking the right questions, because often the answer is the question. And that is why I love doing what I do, because I try to inspire my coachees much more than just teaching them some mountain bike skills. And I noticed that it does work. So that's a lot of the feedback I get, is that people say, wow, this helped me so much, like beyond of what I was expecting. And probably the reason is because I do it on every ride. I lean into the discomfort, and I share this philosophy of looking why some things bother us, and choosing to look deeper in them. Because I think that that is a superpower every person has. The superpower is choice, the choice to respond versus react, the choice to live versus suffer, and the choice to take a break after a stimulus, and to take that break to choose our response. One of the favorite quotes I've ever heard is by Viktor Frankl, who said, between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our power. And that is precisely what I mean. It's our superpower to take that choice and to make out of it. And that both is when I'm riding down a trail, that I choose a line I want to take, but also when someone throws something at me and I choose how to respond. And those are the things that, for me, make the beauty of that learning journey that I take every day, whether I'm on the bike or not.
Totally. Yeah, it's a fantastic quote that goes so much beyond the few words when we really think into it. And fantastic book there by Victor as well. I love that. So thinking about that kind of embracing the struggle, I'm curious, for someone that's just starting out on this journey and they are maybe finding mountain biking and the mindset behind it really difficult, really challenging. How would you suggest they start on this journey of embracing that challenge?
Hmm, that's a great question. I think what helps a lot of people is knowing that agitation is the entry point to change, that we need to sometimes have a specific amount of suffering to make those big changes. In fact, if you look at neuroscience, what's actually happening when you're frustrated and when you're agitated is that your brain releases a chemical called acetylcholine. And it actually, you can imagine it like a little highlighter. It comes into your brain and highlights the areas we want to change. And then during sleep and during rest, our brain does actually change these areas. It's called neuroplasticity. And that's actually what learning is all about. And that's why once we've understood that agitation is the entry point to change, and that sometimes we do need to suffer, we can start to interpret the suffering as something good, because we know that it's the thing that will spark the change, it will spark the growth. And I think, well, for me at least, it does help to know that when I'm starting to suffer and when I'm starting to get into that frustration, to know that, okay, this is actually where I need to be to have change. If I'm always happy and if everything is always great, then that highlighter can't come into my brain. That highlighter cannot mark the areas I want to change, and change will either not occur or it will be much, much slower. And once I understood that, I stopped, because that's usually where the problem occurs. You get frustrated, then you kind of blame yourself for being frustrated. You get even more frustrated, you blame yourself even more, and then you stop something because you don't like that discomfort. But if I feel the suffering, I feel the discomfort, and then I get frustrated, and then I say, aha, well, yay, I'm frustrated, I'm learning, it doesn't create that loop of self-blame. And then the whole discomfort is just the way it is, and I don't turn it into a bad experience. It's just the way it is. I'm not feeling well, I'm frustrated, it's okay, and that's it, it's okay, and it stops there. And I think that can help many people to really know that, hey, as I said, agitation is the entry point to change. This is rooted in neuroscience, it's the way it is, it's important for me to feel this, and get over it, suck it up, buttercup, and let's move on.
That's fantastic. Yeah, it's so great to really hear you dig into the science behind that. And I love the analogy of the highlighter there. It's almost like reframing this agitation or this challenge from this bad negative thing that could cause us to get stuck in a loop of frustration. I'm sure we've all been there, but reframing it to this positive kind of ladder that we can keep stepping up and growing if we lean into that discomfort, as you mentioned there. I love it. That's so fantastic. I'd love for a moment here to maybe talk or wind the clock back a little bit and talk about the early days for you. I know you mentioned that you grew up on the northern Turkish side of Cyprus. I'm curious, like, what was it like growing up there? And when did you start riding bikes in general? Not in particularly mountain bikes, but just bikes in general.
Actually, funny story. I didn't ride bikes at all until I think I was 8. And I crashed so much when I started to learn bike. I just remembered because we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up. So and in Cyprus is, well, back then it was definitely a third world country. So we didn't have stuff like bikes. And when I rode my first bike, it was actually a bike from a girl who visited the island because the parents were taking a sabbatical and they brought the daughter and they had a bike. And that was basically the first time I actually saw a bike. And I must have been like 7 or 8. So I taught myself biking, I think, within a week. And I kept crashing and crashing. But already back then, I was someone that when I wanted something, then I would stick to it. And I would really already back then embrace the discomfort and just get up and keep riding. And that's how I got into like biking in general. Cyprus is an amazing island. As I said, it's not that easy to live there because back then it was a third world country, and now that the island is separated, so I'm from the Turkish side, and the Turkish side did not get into the European Union, just the southern side, which is the Greek side. So we have a lot of conflict between the northern and the southern side, and that's why you don't have a lot of let's call it modern living in the northern side. And that's why we actually moved away there, because we were still in school smacked. It was normal. So the school I went to there was very, let's call it medieval. And that's why we moved to Germany when I was 14. And when we moved to Germany, my German wasn't really good. My mom was German, but still my German wasn't really good. That's why I went to an English school then, after I totally sucked at German school for a year. And then my mom said, okay, we need to go to English school. And then I didn't start riding actually riding mountain bikes until I turned 23 because of, as I said, the knee injury. And what I do want to add, though, is it did form me. And I think one reason why I'm such a good coach nowadays is because of the struggles and the time I had in Cyprus, because of the cultural differences. And the people in Cyprus are very loving, very open, very helpful. And the people in Germany are very, let's call it, strict, and they like to, there's not much community. It is very separate. And this struggle also growing up there and coming into that community and feeling like no one likes me because it's just the cultural differences has also made me the strong woman I am today. And I hope it answers your question.
Wow. Yeah, totally. It's such an incredible story of both hardship, but as well, kind of embracing those challenges and then turning them into positives that are now serving you to live such a vibrant, full life. And I love hearing that as well. It really highlights the fact that it's never too late to start learning a new hobby or start learning a new skill, and the power of kind of doing some hard work and sticking at something. I love that. And so cool to see, like, where you've come from, those humble beginnings. I know we're talking here on Zoom today, and I can see two beautiful bikes in the background there. I'd love to kind of fast forward to today. Like, tell me, what bikes are you riding today, and why are they your bikes of choice?
Right now I'm riding, the two bikes you can see, one's an e-bike. It's a Lapierre. Both of them are Lapierre bikes. I don't think you get them in Canada and USA. I don't
Not
know.
as many, not unless someone goes traveling to Europe and bring ones back. Yeah.
Yeah, they're amazing bikes. And one is just a regular all mountain bike, and the other one is an e-bike. And I love riding e-bikes because they make skills interesting again. For example, what's really amazing on e-bikes is you can ride uphill faster, which improves also the coordination, but also your visuals of riding technical trails uphill. So that's great. And also, obviously, you can just ride up more often, so you can ride downhill more often and also practice more. And both of them are not bikes with a lot of travel, because lately I've noticed that if you really improve your skills, you don't actually need a lot of travel on your bike. So both of them are about 150 millimeter bikes.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's an interesting point at the end there. I know the whole trend of the bike industry is like longer, slacker, more travel, kind of really beefing ourselves up with equipment. But I love that point there of kind of maybe focusing on one of the other performance factors, the technical skills of riding instead of just kind of relying blindly on, the biggest equipment out there.
Definitely. It's always the weakest link in human plus bike is always the human.
Totally. Yeah, the bikes are better than us nowadays for the most part. And with the e-bike there, are you doing much e-bike coaching? Is that something that's kind of blown up a little bit? Yeah.
Yes. Since years. I've been doing e-bike coaching for many years.
Wow.
And some skills are different. Some skills just need to be adapted. And I've been having so many clients on e-bikes. So that's also a reason why I started getting into e-biking a lot, to feel how it feels to explore how skills need to be adapted, especially as a shorter woman, because some skills are just harder for us. If we are short and light and the bike weighs half of our weight, then obviously we need just much more, I'd call it oomph, to do some skills. Totally. And exploring that and knowing that has been also a life changer for me as a coach, but also as a rider. And of course, when I'm coaching cross-country pros, then no chance I'm going with them without an e-bike.
That's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah, it's not only made the sport so much more accessible for people that maybe couldn't mountain bike before, but it also helps us in our profession as a coach as well, being able
Definitely.
to do a little bit more. Yeah, that's fantastic. And kind of on the topic of your coaching and your services, I know you do a whole bunch of different things. Can you run us through, what are some of the different coaching services that you offer? And did this change or pivot at all with the event of COVID?
Definitely. Well, I do mental coaching, then psychological counseling. I'm actually a psychological counselor, which allows me to work with people with depressions, compulsive obsessive disorders. So I'd call it larger challenges than what most people face when they're writing. But obviously, I also do skills coaching. I do training for instructors. I'm an international instructor trainer for the bike instructor certification program. And we're currently enlarging the bike instructor certification program in Europe, opening a European chapter and offering more instructor training courses here. I do coaching for coaches. So, as I said before, if coaches book me or a whole group of coaches book me, then I look at how they can become better coaches and how they can attract the client they want to work with. And of course, I do a whole lot of online coaching. So online skills as well as online mental coaching. And with COVID, the largest step was actually the move towards more online coaching, definitely, which I had been planning for years. But during COVID, we set up the largest German online coaching platform, and I'm currently working on my English online coaching platform. I already have a few courses, but now I'm working on setting up even more courses. I have a mental training course already and a fundamental skills course on my online coaching platform, and that's definitely what I'm going to be working on in the next weeks. And actually, online is the most effective way to learn skills. It's the most cost-effective way to learn skills because, well, motor learning just takes time and you need to build habits, and habits, they don't form overnight. So you need to be persistent at practicing, you need structure at practicing. And that's the amazing thing about online coaching, that you have all this to build your at-home practice habit and to really improve over time, which you need to really get into the advanced skills.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I can definitely vouch for that. That's actually how we met. I remember as
Mhm.
I started out on this journey and, became a coach, and then all of a sudden realized that there was this giant piece of the puzzle missing, which was the mental and emotional skill set there. For coaching riders, I kind of went out on this journey seeking a mental coach for mountain biking of my own. I think it was Ryan Leach that put us in contact at first there. And I remember actually being hesitant as well, saying, no, I'm an in-person coach and this is how it's going to work. You're in Europe, I'm in Canada. I don't know if this is going to work, but I can vouch for that. We've done some fantastic work together that I still refer back to today. And I know, although you haven't got your full English site up there, up and running yet, I can definitely vouch for the modules that are up there, that they are fantastic. I think I first got into that one over a year ago now, but I can say that I still refer back to it on like a monthly basis. So fantastic tools there for people to get into. And where can people find that stuff if they're interested in checking it out?
They can find it on roxybike-coaching.com. And that is one of the biggest advantages of online coaching, just as you said, that you can keep referring back to it because we have such a limited time of concentration. So we can't concentrate for so long. And if you go to a one-day skills clinic or if you work with a mental coach once, then you can't remember all the tools he gives you. And that's so amazing about online coaching, that you can keep referring back to it. And the great thing is, the more often you watch it, the more little nuggets you will find and the deeper your knowledge will get. Because in the first time we watch something, we can't just, we just look at this big picture, and every time we look at it we see the small little details, and they just fall into place and make us such a more able writer, both skills wise but also mentally. That's why I love the online coaching part, and I take so many online courses myself as well nowadays because I love that point of being able to refer back to them over and over again.
Totally. Yeah, it's so great. And I think almost as we learn as well, we start to evolve ourselves, and the meaning of those courses change as well, of those experiences. So that's what I love about it. And that's one huge positive of COVID, wasn't it? It was almost like the change agent we all needed to lean into this new way of learning and really embrace it. Um,
Definitely.
so I love that. So what goes hand in hand with the online stuff for you is your YouTube channel, which is, you know, inspires a whole lot of riders, and has been, really, really good for everyone involved. Can you tell us a little bit about like the general theme of your content and what you aim to do with that YouTube channel?
Definitely. I blend and interrelate online coaching. And well, no, sorry, I blend and interrelate psychology with skills and look into how we can learn from one and transfer it to the other. So basically, I share my knowledge and also my experience as a psychological counselor, and then I link it to how we can use this to learn mountain bike skills faster and also vice versa. It's a mixture of skills tutorials, but also mindset impulses and hands-on tools also to, for example, let go of frustration or to biohack your brain to learn faster. It also has a lot of resources for mountain bike instructors that will help them to understand how learning works and how they can accelerate their own, but also the learning in their students. And also a few pretty well, step-by-step skills tutorials, although obviously it's in no way relatable to what I offer on my online coaching platform, because obviously there it's really clear instruction versus a tutorial on YouTube, which basically gives you the end movement and not all the tiny little steps in between.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's this great kind of portfolio of free resources, isn't it? And I know you do a lot of work there to keep it free as well and keep it ad free, which is something, I find really impressive. There's not many videos I watch on YouTube these days that don't have annoying mandatory ads. So hats off to you on that one for keeping it free for riders. And why is it that you spend so much effort keeping your content free and accessible on YouTube?
Well, to be honest, I believe that every person, or well, I believe that knowledge is one of the biggest wealths we have on earth because actually it multiplies when we share it. And I believe that if we have something and if we have knowledge, then why not share it? Because it's just going to multiply, and through the sharing, it will refine and advance. So one of my wishes is actually advancing the global standard for mountain bike instruction and making it more accessible for more people around the world, and also helping people not live by the advice which got me into hospital on my first ride, which is speed is your friend and you need to crash to progress. All that stuff is in my eyes, it's not the way to learn. I believe that if you progress step by step, and if you listen to your emotions, listen to your body, listen to the skill level you're at the moment, and don't listen to your ego and your skill level where you think you should be and ride according to that, then you can progress step by step with time and slowly but steadily, and you can progress without crashing. You don't need to go beyond your limit to expand that limit. And that is something that I want to give out into the world because it would have helped me so much in the beginning. And I just want to spare people that painful time and also go a little against the trend, which you can see nowadays, that don't break in corners, or as I said, speed is your friend, or just go fast and pull up. That is the advice that brings people into hospital and just leads people down a dead end. And especially as an instructor with so much knowledge, it's a shame if we don't share it,
Totally.
It's such a precious asset. And nowadays with the tools like YouTube, we can use it to help people. So why not help others?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Such a great goal there, just to spread this knowledge. And we really are living in the golden era of skill instruction, aren't we? Where we have so much access to such good content, like the stuff that you publish on your YouTube channel. And it is amazing to think of a world in the future where there won't be maybe as many of these, well-intentioned misconceptions and, yeah, bad advice basically getting around out on the trail. It's really exciting to think of a day like that. I know, you put so much work into this stuff. When you finally get a chance to take a break and go for a ride for yourself, what does a perfect ride look like for you and why?
Perfect ride for me is one where I can let go of the buzz of the noise of the day. And often I start with just some breathing because breath is the bridge to our nervous system. So when we breathe out longer than we breathe in, we actually allow our nervous system to relax. And that is, for example, one of the hands-on tools I also have in my online courses to allow people to know if they are in what state of arousal they are, and to know how they can change it in a way that it serves them. And then, to be honest, I practice skills, leaning into that discomfort, because I love that you can always keep going back to the fundamentals, and they will never be perfect. So you can always work on your own fundamentals, no matter how long you have been riding. Or I just go out and into nature and ride and stay in the moment. Also, what I love doing when I practice is just practicing to be compassionate and to be kind to myself, to have the courage to make mistakes, and also to be kind to myself, even if I am struggling. And basically the name of your podcast, which is Grit with Wisdom, that you do know that you can work hard, but still be kind to yourself. And
Totally.
yeah, to develop that wisdom, both the inner wisdom to know when your soul has fully signed on to the task you're doing, but also the wisdom of looking inside and not outside of what the goal of the ride is.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I love so many points that you brought up there, that almost like the perfect ride starts with the breathing, with calming of our nervous system before we even get on the bike, or even as we're pedaling up there as well. This kind of conscious intention to get into the zone or get into the moment, and really enjoy it, so that we can be in tune with our body and how we're feeling. I love that. I know I've watched a lot of your videos, so I know kind of what trails, or what kind of trails you're riding there at home. But maybe you could describe to the listeners, the style of trails you like riding, and what they're like.
Oh, well, I love natural and technical trails. So I don't actually enjoy riding quickly or riding fast. I can do it and I'm not bad at it, but it just doesn't give me anything. I think for me, life is too short to be in a hurry. So I love technical, slow rides. And I usually describe it as slow speed poise. So placing my wheels where I really want them to go, staying in the moment. And it's kind of like solving a puzzle that
Totally.
when it's really blocked, and you can't just open the brakes and do it with speed, but you really need that skills, you need that finesse. That's why what I really love writing.
That's great. Yeah, I can certainly relate living here on the North Shore. Sometimes going slow is more of a rush and is more fun than actually just going as fast as we can. And I love that analogy of a puzzle as well. It's so great being there in the moment, thinking about, where am I placing my wheel? When am I turning? What do I need to do exactly at each moment in time? That's so great. So I definitely recommend everyone checks out your YouTube channel and can kind of see some of this stuff for themselves. We didn't mention it there. What was the name of your YouTube channel?
It's called Roxy's Ride and Inspire.
Fantastic. A great name there as well. I'll be sure to put that one in the show notes. When you're out there riding, I'm curious, do you have any key principles that you personally use for operating in an optimal state of mind for this technical kind of terrain?
Definitely. Key principles is always to stay balanced, and that is such a broad term because it applies to so much. It's not only finding the balance in the bike, but also finding the balance in my mind, and finding the balance of also, again, questioning, why do I want to ride this? Why do I want to do this? Is it just because it will, as stupid as it sounds, but is it just because it looks cool on Instagram? Or is this something that I want from the bottom of my heart? So tuning into my heart and finding the balance of why I want to do this, and then finding the balance on the bike, in the bike, to allow the bike to work as it wants to work. And that is something that I keep coming back to. It's always, am I balanced and am I wasting energy? So is the move flowy? Is the move fluid, or does it look chunky? And if it is chunky, then how can I make it more fluid? So basically, these two principles are something that I apply to many areas in my life.
That's fantastic. Yeah, instead of fighting those forces, it's like, how can we work with them?
Yeah.
I love that. And that kind of synergy of the mind, body, and the bike all working together.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So a great one for people out there maybe struggling with their riding a little bit or struggling to get into a good state of mind is to listen and feel for these things. It's like, am I pushing against some forces, or am I working with them? Yeah, I love that. And when it comes to practice, how do you ensure the practice stays engaging and doesn't turn into like a chore that you have to do?
That's also a great question. I'd say one thing that definitely helps is, for one thing, journaling and keeping a structure, and also always listening into the why of the exercise and feeling what will change if I really do this exercise and what will happen if I don't do it. So thinking and feeling into the exercise and not just doing it because I have to. But once you actually start to understand how mountain biking works and how you can work in harmony with your bike instead of fighting it, that's when everything starts to become easy. And that's when also practicing, in my eyes, becomes more easy, because I just tune into the why, tune into the what would happen if I don't do it. And that's when I start finding the joy also in just being in the moment and practicing.
Totally. Yeah, I love that point of finding a strong why. Really, like, why do I want to do this? Is it an ego-based objective, or is it because I actually want to learn this skill because it will help me with X, Y, and Z? Yeah. It almost doesn't feel like practice at all, does it? Once we've got a strong why, it's just like this thing. It's like, oh, why wouldn't I do this? Of course I'd do this.
Exactly. Yeah. And that should always be the thing. So why wouldn't I do this? Also, though, what is important to acknowledge at the beginning, because a lot of people are like, oh, I don't want to practice and I don't see the point in it, that sometimes we do need to fight that struggle of not wanting, because often if we just get out after 2 minutes, it will start to feel like fun, but the first 2 minutes it may not. So knowing that and then still going out and just doing it regularly in the beginning is what's needed to build the habit of practicing, and that habit will inevitably increase your skills. As long as you're practicing, you will increase your skills, you will improve. But that's the problem, that a lot of people, they don't go out and practice, and then they're like, yeah, well, why can't I ride this section, or I want to ride a double black and I want to jump this and this, but they don't ever practice. And that's an expectation that is just not realistic. And that's actually one of the reasons why I think that most fears out there, or basically when I'm working with riders on their fears, is that most fears are self-made, because, as you said, people are allowing their ego decide what they should ride and not their heart decide what they want to ride, and their mind decide what they should ride according to their momentary skill level. So that is something that I always work on with my clients, is finding out why you want to ride this. Do you actually have the skills to ride this? And is your why ego or heart dominated? So what is the real motivation?
Totally. Yeah. So slowing down a bit and almost like just trusting the process, being happy to be there in the moment rather than setting goals that are too far outside of our reach. And then getting anxious because we don't reach them straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. That's a great one. On the subject of fear, I've heard you compare fear to a fire alarm before. And I'm wondering if you could share that analogy, because I found it really useful myself.
Definitely. For me, that was also a game changer when I started thinking about it like that, because a lot of people come and they say, hey, I'd love to be fearless. I want to get rid of my fears. But actually, everything you want to get rid of is not going to go away. So the first step is always that we need to accept the fear or whatever emotion we want to let go of, and then we can work on allowing it to go. So what I like to and apart from that, is being fearless is just not the goal, because being fearless is actually a very dangerous state. And some people that do have the state of being fearless, it's actually a dysfunctional way of risk assessment. So it's a dysfunction of our risk assessment programs. And it then becomes a problem because fears are important. And if you are fearless, then you will hurt yourself. So it's acknowledging that, for one thing, fear is important. But of course, if I just say that to you, you're like, yeah, whatever, fear is important. But if you think of it as a fire alarm, so let's look at the analogy. Imagine you had two fire alarms. One's a little oversensitive and it bleeps every time you just burn the toast. And now you have a second fire alarm, and this one's a little lazy. It won't bleep when the toast is burned, but it will also not bleep when the toaster has set the curtains on fire. So now, if you're totally honest to yourself, which fire alarm would you buy and which would you prefer having? You'd probably prefer the first one, so the oversensitive one. Well, because after all, you'd rather err on the side of safety when it comes to something as life-threatening as fire. And precisely this insight helps many people who struggle with having that oversensitive warning system, who struggle with being a little more careful than, let's say, their partners, because I have that a lot of time. They come like, hey, why is my husband not scared? And why am I scared? And he isn't actually a better rider than I am. So why is he scared? Is he not scared and I'm scared? Well, what's the alternative? Would you rather have that oversensitive fire alarm, or would you rather have the fire alarm that will miss a fire? And then after that, we can work on developing habits and also certain behaviors that will allow this client to work with their oversensitive fire alarm, like, opening the window and airing the kitchen before the fire alarm sets off, in like a figurative sense.
Totally. Yeah. So starting on that side of caution and then almost fine tuning from there to get the perfect fire alarm or the perfect fear system.
And actually, one more thing I want to add to that is that it is a huge difference between men and women, like biologically, because when we get scared, so when we have that fear response, we actually just have three possible responses, and that is freeze, fight, or flight. And men usually, this is obviously not every man is like that, but most men usually go into the fight response, and women usually go into hiding or fleeing, but usually hiding. So that's like, it is an overgeneralization, but it does have its truth.
And is that an evolutionary thing, do you think?
Exactly. It's an evolutionary thing. And also because your brain is always, when it has panic, it always checks for the possible outcome. So duration, path, and outcome is always what it checks for. And if you know that you as a woman cannot fight the tiger, then you're going to hide. And as a man, you learned how to fight the tiger. You have the strength, so you can fight the tiger. So as a man, it's just more natural to go into that fight response. And when it comes to mountain biking, it's super important to understand that, because I see that a lot when I'm working with clients, especially when funny enough, I do couples therapy on the bike sometimes. So I have a couple, they have problems in their relationship, but they also ride together, and they come to me because they say, hey, we have a few problems, but mainly we have problems riding together. And actually, it's just a mirror of the problems they have in their relationship, which they take into biking. And one of the reasons is often that she's like, he gets scared and he just opens the brakes and he rides down, and I get scared and I lock the brakes and I get off. And once you've understood that, it's exactly that. Men, when they get scared on the bike, they open the brakes, they fight the trail. So they just full throttle, let go and fight it. And women, they flee or they hide. So they freeze up and they get off the bike, or they push the bike, or they tense up and they don't ride it. And actually, that response, understanding that and working with it, can be such a game changer also for couples, because you become more accepting of your biological way of doing things. And it is a difference between men and women. And this is not about sexism, it's just the way biology works. And once we've understood that, it does change a lot, because many women then get accepting, and many men get accepting of their women behaving the way they are. And it takes a huge lot of stress when they're riding together.
Totally. I love that. Thanks for sharing, and talk about bikes as an amazing tool for learning. So not only are they learning how to ride a bike better with you, they're also learning about how to understand each other better and how to work better as partners. That's so fantastic. And I know you mentioned it kind of at the start of that explanation there, that having no fear or being fearless is not a good goal to have, and it's actually a dysfunction. I think it's a bit of a misinterpretation in the action sports world as a whole, that maybe high level riders that are doing some really amazing things, maybe things that we think are crazy, like that they have no fear. I know I've just been up at Crankworks in Whistler, and I watched some really really inspiring stuff, and you know riders just riding at a level that I've never seen before. I'm curious, from your perspective, do you think that these types of riders have no fear, or is it
No,
different?
definitely. I don't think they do, because if they did, then they would just crash even more often. And, nobody actually wants to crash. And nobody, well, as I said, nobody with a normal, let's call it, respect for themselves actually wants to crash often. And especially riders at that level, they can't even afford doing that, because if they do, then they're not going to be able to attend the next event. And it takes ages to get back from complete rest to the fitness they need to do those things. So I actually think that those riders have an amazing risk assessment. It's just that they have built up their skills with a lot of practice, and everyone who is a high performer, whether on the bike or in business or whatever, will tell you that he has habits of practice, and a lot of them actually also have a practice of gratitude, so knowing what they can do and being thankful for the things. And I'm pretty sure at least all the pro riders I have met in life, they have this innate trust in their abilities, and they work their way up step by step. And that's why the things which look insane to us are actually pretty sane to them, because they have been practicing similar things and working their way up to where they are now. So no, I would definitely not say that they are fearless.
Totally. I've got to say, I agree there. And it's so great. That's why I love having these conversations, because too often we see the finished product, we see the competition at Crankworks or the video on YouTube, and we're like, wow, I can't believe he just went and did that, or she just went and dropped off that. But what we haven't seen is the system and the habits and the process, and that uses years of learning and work behind actually doing the final goal or the final feature. So it's so cool to hear a bit of the background from someone who coaches riders like this as well. And I know, you put a really deep focus on having riders really understand the why behind their riding, their skills, their emotions. So I'm curious, like, how important is it for you to create space for riders to ask questions during the process?
A lot. Why I always tell at the beginning of any coaching session I give, I always tell them, hey, look, this session is not about me, it's about you. So we need to find solutions that work for you. So I want you to ask as many questions as possible, because only if you have found your why, you will want to do the things that we need to do to create those practice habits. So I always ask for questions, and I actually encourage questions, and there is no such thing as stupid questions, because questions, as I said before, questions are often the answer. So sometimes people, when they ask a question, they actually start to understand things deeply, and then they don't even need the answer, because just asking the question has helped them so much. So it's definitely a big part of my coaching. And to be honest, I think one huge difference between instruction, training, and coaching is that when you're instructing someone, you give them clear movement goals and you just tell them what to do. When you're training them, it's also that, but also finding with them solutions and a plan that is more individual. And then there's coaching, where you actually find a solution individually for each person. So I don't like using the word coaching when I'm coaching groups, because I think it's very, very hard to coach groups, because you need to find individual solutions for everyone. So basically in groups, it's more group instruction or group training. And then coaching is more something that I do in private. But nowadays, the word or the term coaching is widely used for anything. But for me, that is the distinction between the three of them.
Totally. Yeah. Thanks for distinguishing there. And I love that. It's, I find it so useful myself when I'm learning new things, that process of asking questions, because like you say there, often by the time we've got halfway through our question, a new neural pathway is fired, and we're like, oh, yeah, that's the answer. It makes sense to me. And I know for myself, when I've came up with the question or came up with the answer, it sticks. It sticks a lot better than if someone just tells me do X because it will help with Y.
Definitely. Yeah. That's why I also ask a lot of questions when I'm working with people, because only then I can actually find solutions that work for them. And I think that is our role if we are really getting into high performance coaching, that we need to change and adapt the tools we use and to find solutions that work for the person who is in front of us, and not because it works for me or because it worked in some instructor training course that I took, because every person is different. And of course there is a, let's call it an overform of a movement, but then there is always individual adaptations of the movement that are needed depending on, for example, leg length. Or I worked with a guy who was missing a leg, thigh down, the other day. So obviously it's you need to adapt to find solutions that will work for them. It doesn't help if I tell him, no, you have to ride flats. You know, he can't with that leg, with a
Or ride
leg.
level pedals. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. That's great. Yeah, it's such an important point as a coach that everyone learns a little bit different and everyone understands things a little bit different and everyone does things a little bit different. And that's okay. I think accepting that is huge. And, as a lifelong learner yourself, I'm curious, how do you go about setting yourself goals that are achievable yet challenging and fun at the same time?
One formula I like to use is the SMART formula. I don't know if you know it.
I have heard of this one, and I know there's a few different adaptations of this one. So I'd love to hear your version. Yeah.
So I think it's pretty standard adaptation, which is SMART, which is specific, measurable, attractive, realistic, and terminated. So when I set goals, I do write down a specific goal. So an example for this is not I don't write down I want to learn to wheelie, but I would write down I want to wheelie 20 meters. Then measurable, I would write by the 20th of September, for example. The next one is attractive. And that's important because it creates basically you need dreams to really do something for your wishes. So the point attractive for me is super important because I imagine how I feel when I reach that goal. So for example, let's stick with the wheelie, 20 meters by September 20th, then I'd be like, okay, I will feel so proud of myself. I am going to stun my best friend who thinks I will never reach that. That's attractive for me. It sets positive emotions free. Then realistic is the next one. So obviously, if I've never ever practiced a wheelie before, then me now saying that by September 20th, which is a month away, I'm probably not going to reach that. So it wouldn't be realistic, but me knowing that I have practiced wheelies, so 20 meters is realistic, it's a realistic goal. And as I already said before, terminated because I also said by September the 20th, and the 20 meters is it's measurable and terminated. So those are the SMART, the letters that make a goal also measurable and realistic and make it possible because we know what we're looking at. So that's something I do apply to many areas of my life, whether it's learning how to cook or bake a muffin or feeding my cats, or when I want my cat to lose weight because he's too chubby again, or when I'm trying to learn a wheelie.
That's fantastic. Yeah, such a great framework of making sure that we really set ourselves up for success with our goals, and we're not just kind of having these loose wishes that are up in the air and we never actually
you know what, actually why most people don't reach their goals and why most people don't set goals? It's actually super interesting because a lot of people are so scared of failing, and they are so scared of showing that vulnerability, and then of needing to say, okay, my goal was 20th of September and I didn't reach it, and of admitting that failure, that a lot of people, that keeps them from actually setting goals. And obviously if you don't set goals, you can't reach them. So that's something that I work on a lot with people when they come to me and say, hey, I have a lot of goals, whether it be in business or on the bike, and I just can't reach them. It is one of the main reasons why people never reach them, because they are so scared of failing. And especially in our meritocracy we have today, where everything is about getting grades in school and being perfect in many things, it makes it hard for people to embrace that struggle and to actually show that vulnerability and have that courage to go out there and set a goal that you may fail at. But funny enough, I actually listened to a podcast yesterday by one of my favorite neuroscientists. His name is Andrew Huberman, and he said that actually it's interesting that if you imagine failing and what would happen, it actually doubles the chance of reaching the goal. So a lot of people usually say, okay, you imagine I'm going to stun my friends when I finally learn that wheelie, and everyone's going to be so wowed that it actually helps more to imagine if you don't reach it, what will happen then, how disappointed you will be with yourself, that your friends will laugh at you, because then you will actually stick to that practice and do it. But of course, it also needs to be a, let's call it, healthy fear, because if you're so paralyzed of making mistakes, then obviously you're not going to set the goal in the first place. But that is something that also, if you're working with people and if they're scared to set goals, look at how willing they are to fail, and how, if they are ready to accept failure as a necessity when learning, or if for them failure is an undesired side effect. Because if they are still at the undesired side effect part, then it's going to be very hard to reach goals.
Totally. Yeah. I think, like you're saying there, embracing that failure as part of the journey and a necessary component in getting to the end goal. I love that. And it's a really interesting point you made there, of visualizing, like, what is the worst possible scenario of if I do fail and I don't meet this goal? Because often it's not as bad as we originally think it up to be in our mind. And often our friends aren't going to laugh at us. They're probably going to pat us on the back and say, at least you tried, or nice job, like do it again, right? That's great. I know I do a similar exercise sometimes that I actually got from one of my favorite podcasters. So I love that we're sharing a few here. His name's Tim Ferriss. But he shares an exercise called fear setting. And that's one I do not necessarily in biking, but more so in life. If there's anything that I've built up to be really scared of, or a move a bit tentative to make, is it's actually called fear setting. So you're like, well, what are my fears? What's the worst possible thing that could happen if I do X? And then how could I get back to where I am now if that does happen? And it's a really, really nice way I find of reducing any of those fears or anxieties, and realizing that, hey, even if the worst possible thing happens, I'm going to be okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, fantastic. So speaking of learning, what's a new skill that you've learned lately?
Actually, I started rock climbing.
Awesome.
And stand-up paddling. Stand-up paddling basically because I just wanted something to get out in nature, and I do a lot of yoga, and I get to combine it with SUPing, so that's fun. And it's Mallorca is beautiful. I actually just released a video about this today on YouTube.
I've seen the promo on Instagram. I haven't had time to sit down and watch it yet, but I'll be sure to. Yeah.
And the other one is rock climbing, and that's kind of funny because I took a course for rock climbing. So I booked a private instructor, and it was such an important lesson for me to learn way beyond climbing, because this guy, super nice guy, and he has his instructor training. I think he's given a few courses, but he's pretty beginner at it. He's a pretty good climber himself. And he actually, now in retrospect, I know what happened, and it was such a learning for me. He took my boyfriend and me to my boyfriend is scared of heights. So he took us to climb by the seaside, where you start at an elevation of about 15 meters and you climb up 15 meters. So you end up at about 30 meters. And it's totally exposed. So you see the sea, and everything is moving, because obviously the sea is moving and there's seagulls flying by. And it's beautiful unless you're scared of heights. And he was totally in panic, and he did well because he's strong, and he was able to compensate for the lack of skills with strength. And what he did with us is, I don't know the English term for this. There's two types of climbing. The one is where the rope is at top rope, right?
Top rope. Yeah.
And the other one is
tread climbing.
Is that it? When you put your
or lead climbing, when you're climbing up and you're clipping on to each bolt.
That's it, lead climbing. So he actually allowed us, or made us lead climb on the second day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was I had a total anxiety attack in the middle of the wall because the last one where I clipped in was about more than a meter below me, and the next one was about 1.5 meters above me, but I just didn't know how to get there and I couldn't get back anymore. So I was in the middle and we never practiced falling. So those are the skills that I was missing, and I was totally paralyzed in the wall, almost started to cry. And the next day my body ached everywhere because I was so much in that panic and so much adrenaline in my whole body. And all he said then was, no, yeah, you just need mental strength. So you just need to believe in yourself to get up there. And I got pretty angry with him then because I was like, no, that is not mental strength. I was lacking the skills. I was totally lacking the skills, because I don't know the way you rate climbing in Canada, but here it was a 5. So it's not a beginner climbing thing. And I am a total beginner. This was my day 2. And with my boyfriend scared of heights. And so we were lead climbing up, and then you need to change it so that you can take the stuff with you.
Totally. Yeah, you've got to set up a system. My hands are sweating just hearing this because I'm a climber as well.
And he made us do that at 30 meters height and like with huge exposure, which he was well-intentioned again, but because for him this was a 5, so it's easy, you know. So he had lost the connection to what it is for a person with scared of heights and for a person who is short and apparently doesn't have a lot of strength or technique. And we didn't practice skills at all. We didn't really spend enough time practicing all that, the skills you also need with a rope to change and to, as I said, I don't know how the terms are as I'm a beginner.
That's okay.
And it was so important for me because I noticed that this is what people do when they go out riding. They go out riding, they buy an expensive mountain bike, they go out to a trail park, they start with the green ones, they do the blue ones, and then they're like, hey, why not try a black one? Because their friends are riding it or whatever, why not? And then they start getting fearful, and then they start thinking, okay, whatever, it worked, so I'm just going to work myself up. And that's a huge difference between climbing and mountain biking. With climbing, there's just no way you can progress without the skills. With mountain biking, if you have a good mountain bike, if it has a lot of travel, then yes, you can advance to a point where you really crash. So then they start crashing, and then they're like, okay, I have a mental block with steep and gnarly stuff. But no, it's not a mental block. In 90% of the cases when I'm working with riders, it's because they advance themselves into terrain which is too advanced for them too fast. And that is exactly what this instructor did with us, that he advanced us to high consequence terrain too fast. And then he's like, yeah, you just need mental strength. And that's what people think. They're like, I just need the courage to ride this. No, you don't need the courage to ride this. You need the skills to ride this. Just like I needed the skills to climb that. I can be as mentally strong as I want. If I don't have the skills, it's not going to get me anywhere. And the same was with mountain biking. The only difference is that with mountain biking, people don't notice it until they start crashing, because the mountain bikes have gotten so good and because the material we have is so amazing, and you can compensate for a lot of skills with speed until it goes wrong. And that's why I was so grateful for this actually pretty horrible experience, because I noticed how important it is to progress riders step by step and to distinguish between legitimate fear and a mental block. And what I had was 100% legitimate fear because I did not have the skills, and allowing people to also find out what is it that they have. Do they not have the skills? Or do they have the skills and they can't harness those skills because they are scared? And that's the difference between a legitimate fear, is when you really don't have the skills and you just think you have them, and mental block is when out of some reason, because of a trauma or a crash or a childhood experience or whatever happened, you have the skills but you cannot perform the way you would like to. Yeah, that was a long story, but it was very important.
What a great learning experience out of what was, potentially such a scary situation. I'm so glad you got off the wall okay there.
Definitely, me too.
Yeah, it's so great that you've drawn such a positive out of this. And I know I'm a big believer as well at trying out lots of different sports, in particular mountain sports for me. And one of the reasons I love doing other stuff other than biking is because of what it teaches me about biking and about learning in general. And that's so huge. And I think, your climbing instructor there, like he uses his mental strength to get up the wall because he has the skills to get up the wall. And I find for myself, I'm incredibly fortunate to have a friend who's a really experienced rock climbing instructor. Big shout out to Rob there. But he was kind to me. He did the training. I started belaying off a tree to start with, on a slope in the park after work, and then eventually got onto the wall. And for me now, when I'm sitting there and I'm getting scared, it is a matter of working through my fears and using my mental strength, because I know I have that inherent know that I can climb this. I just need to calm down my arousal levels to a point where I can think and find the next hold. And that's one of the things I love about rock climbing most, is that when we are doing multi-pitch climbing, if I don't work through my fears and keep going up the wall, our whole day's over, and it's a big pain to kind of belay all the way back down the wall. So that's a great thing. I have to really kind of sit there with my fears and work through them. Whereas with mountain biking, I find it's often a lot easier to say, hey, this is just a bad feature. I'll walk around it today and the day after and the day after. And never really give it the time it deserves, and maybe, give our technical skills, honor them and say, yes, I do have the skills to ride this. It's time to employ some of these mental skills and let myself do that. So yeah, I love that story and the distinguishment you made there between like a legitimate fear and a fear that's actually good, that's there to serve us in the moment when we are actually in danger. I think it's one of the downsides, I guess, of mountain biking becoming more accessible and the bikes becoming better and better and the trails becoming maybe easier to get up, is that we can find ourselves in the deep end really fast.
Definitely agreed. Also, it's a danger of bike parks, I would say. And of course, it is also a danger of e-bikes, that there are more elements to learning skills, or to, let's call it, performing on the bike. And one of them is definitely strength, endurance, coordination, the skill itself, and the mindset. And of course, the flexibility to be able to use your range of motion. So these 6 parts, if you don't have the strength and don't have the endurance, you can still get to the trails because there are bike parks and e-bikes. And of course, if you then crash and if you don't have the strength, so the muscle protecting you, then something bad can really happen. So of course, there's an upside and a downside to everything. And as much as I love e-bikes, I do see the dangers of them getting people to places they don't really belong. And the same applies to long travel bikes and bike parks. Definitely, I do see the worst crashes when I'm coaching at bike parks.
Totally. So much like when we buy a new bike, we buy a really nice helmet. Should probably buy some skill instruction at the same time, man.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I keep saying people don't, like, because a lot of people are like, yeah, I'm going to spend 7,000 euros on my bike. I say, seriously, spend 4,000 and just spend 1,000 on skill instruction, and you're going to ride that bike like a 10,000 euro bike. Totally. Because that 7,000 euro bike or dollars, it doesn't make you a good rider, but that $1,000 or euros skill instruction will definitely improve your quality of ride by so much that no bike can give you. But unfortunately, a lot of people, they just spend more money on bikes and less on
the shiny objects.
Instruction.
Yeah, that's okay. It is changing slowly. We're seeing a change in our industry, and I love that. You mentioned something earlier. I wanted to kind of loop back to it. You mentioned that you have a journaling practice in relation to your riding. I'd love to hear a little bit about your journaling practice.
I definitely have a journaling practice for many things in my life, and also when I'm practicing, because I found out that before I was journaling, that thoughts or things we remember, they just become blurry after a while. And sometimes we start getting frustrated, although we have actually made a lot of progress. So journaling helps me to also keep track of my progress, to keep practicing, and to see whether I have really not improved, because sometimes it feels like I'm not improving, but actually I have. So what I usually do is I use my journaling to set a goal for the next 2 or 3 weeks, how often I want to practice, what I want to practice. And then after each session, I write down what I actually did practice and how I felt about it. And if I'm reaching goals, I also like to highlight them, because actually being aware of your goals is super important. It releases dopamine in your brain, and that's like glue, and it actually glues the progress in place. So just as like the other neurochemical, which is acetylcholine, when we get frustrated, like the highlighter in your brain, dopamine is the glue that glues the progress in place. and both of them are important. And you release dopamine if you have random intermittent reward. So basically, if I'm journaling and then I notice, hey, wow, I did make progress after all, this is random and it's intermittent. So it releases a whole lot of dopamine, and that really accelerates learning. So that's how I use journaling for my practice sessions. I use journaling for all the online courses I do, because especially handwritten. So I don't know if you can see this, but I have these little handwritten books everywhere, of every online course I take, of anything I see in life that inspires me to find my heart message again. And basically, what's important is to write it down by hand and not type it out, because apparently it also activates areas in our brain which help us to remember better. Because we can't write that quickly, it also helps us to kind of crystallize the essence of the idea, and that's how it helps us to reduce the big topics to smaller chunks, and allows us to learn it faster and also deeper. And that's why I use it a lot for many areas in my life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm a huge believer in journaling too, and I know it took me a long time to embrace doing it for writing. I just didn't see the value in it for a long time, and I regret not starting it earlier. But the fact that I've started now has been huge, and I think the part that's been most impactful for me has been that reflection process afterwards. Because like you were saying there, so often we are learning and we are growing, but we're not really taking the time to take stock of like, wow, I've got a whole lot better in the last month, in the last year, whatever it is. These are all the things that I'm doing well now, and this is what I'm going to do to get better next time. Such
Definitely.
a great way of crystallizing and like you say, releasing that dopamine, remembering what we are doing well.
Definitely.
Do you ever write down in your journal maybe what you're not doing well?
Of course, I do also. Often, actually, it's also something that helps me notice that it's not as dramatic as in my head it feels. Sometimes we over dramatize in our head, and we start to get really, I call it, unkind to ourselves in our heads, because we start to, we really start to blame ourselves for things which are actually just not friendly. And once you start to write them out, you notice that, hey, I would never talk to a friend like that. Why am I talking to myself like that? And once you write it out, it becomes real. A lot of things in our head they don't seem real, but of course we perceive them as real. And if we keep doing that negative self-talk, it just becomes a habit, and then it becomes something we do every day. And then we're like, why am I not progressing? Well, obviously, if you're telling yourself you're stupid every day, how are you going to get beyond that? But once you start writing that out, you notice that it's not a kind thing to do. And that's when, for a lot of people, and for myself also, those negative self-talk loops, they start disappearing.
Yeah, totally. So becoming conscious of some of that internal dialogue and realizing how that might be impacting us, good or bad.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, and on the subject of, routines and work that you're doing off the bike to help with your riding, I'd love to hear about your gravity yoga practice and how that helps your performance on the bike.
Gravity yoga is a new type of yoga, and it's actually a non-spiritual, results-oriented, and evidence-based training program. It allows you to gain flexibility really fast, and there's a few principles it applies to which are scientifically proven. And the main reason why it really helps people is, as I said before, to perform a specific move on the bike, you need a specific range of motion. For example, manuals, if you cannot extend your arms and legs to reach that pivot point to lift the front wheel because you don't have the flexibility, then you can work on the skills as much as you want. As long as you don't increase your range of motion, you're not going to get to perform the move. So basically, with gravity yoga, you hold specific poses for pretty long, and you also apply a specific breathing technique, and you want to meet or beat your hold time. So you want to have at least 2 minutes hold time, and you increase it to up to 5 minutes hold time. And all this with the specific breathing technique to melt into the pose, because if you don't relax into the pose, then you have a stretch reflex, and then your body is basically fighting the stretch. And as long as it's doing that, you can't really improve your range of motion because you don't even get to the end of the range of motion. And once you improve that range of motion, you will feel that your body is more nimble on the bike. And obviously, it also helps to avoid injuries because you don't get to that end range of motion that quickly. That's why for me also it was a game changer, because I was actually too tight in my hamstrings, which is why I was struggling with learning the manual for ages. And for many, many riders, I have heard now, I have an online gravity yoga course for people to follow along at home. And I have so many riders, both pros and also hobby athletes, who say they have, the course has changed their way of riding because they are so much more nimble on their bike. And especially the breathing technique really helps you to relax. And that's something that nowadays in our stressy, fast-paced world, we totally forget about, which is why I think gravity yoga is a very powerful tool to improve our life on and off the bike. And actually flexibility decreases every year. So if we don't do anything, we get more and more unflexible from year to year. So it's very important to actually work on flexibility.
Wow, that's huge. So cool to hear the theory behind that, because I know I've been doing yoga off the bike for years to help with my riding and also help calm my mind. And I do a lot of yin yoga, so a lot of slow stretching. But what I have found is that I've been following the same instructional videos for a couple of years now, but I still really suffer from tight hips, tight hamstrings after day on the bike. So that idea of meeting or beating the time under tension, I think that's something that might be really helpful for myself. So I'm definitely going to check out your course there. And I love that, you've learned this new skill, this new way of doing yoga, and that you've created a course straight away to share with other people as well. It's fantastic to hear.
Yeah, I just thought, how can I apply this knowledge to mountain biking again? And how can I kind of serve the mountain biking community to, again, make or share things that made riding easier for me? Because I'm sure if I struggle, why shouldn't others struggle as well?
Yeah, totally. I love that. And I'm curious, from your perspective as an experienced rider and professional instructor, what is usually the biggest obstacle that riders face in achieving their goals?
The biggest obstacle, I would say, is definitely creating that practice habit and embracing the discomfort as part of it, and also embracing or having the courage to do things that you're not good at, because we tend to repeat the things we are good at, and we tend to just go out and ride, but actually we're not improving when we're riding, because there's a learning zone and a performance zone. And as soon as there are consequences for errors, so as soon as our brain detects some kind of positive, negative consequence for an error, it puts us into the performance zone. This means that in a performance zone, we can only perform the moves that we already know how to perform. There is no way to learn new movements as soon as we are in a performance zone. And many people just don't have the courage to go into that learning zone, because yes, a learning zone can seem boring at first because there shouldn't be any consequences for our errors. So this is either a parking lot or a very, very easy trail that you need to go out and you need to practice specific moves that also seem weird at first. I do this especially when I'm working with pro riders and I take them back to their fundamentals. They're like, what, really? But after all of them, after at least a week, they're like, okay, I get it now, because everything else that comes later on builds on the fundamentals. That's why they're called fundamentals, because they're the foundation of your riding. And if you have building blocks missing in your foundation, then you can work at the top of your, I call it a skills pyramid, as much as you want. It's not going to improve your foundation. And doing that, putting yourself into the learning zone deliberately, embracing again that discomfort, embracing that you need to fail to learn, and building that practice habit is what most people struggle with, and why most riders I know, they just stagnate. They just hit a plateau at some point because they keep doing what they're good at and they never look at the things they're not good at, which is why they just keep ingraining their habits, and that just keeps them on that plateau. So I just hope to bring out into the world, and that's also one reason why I have the YouTube channel, to allow people to understand how learning actually works, to allow people to go out there and practice and build a structured practice. And with my online courses, they can actually do that. They can follow the structured drills I have from wherever they are in the world without needing to travel, and improve the riding in such a way that they never would have expected.
Totally,
That's, I
yeah.
think, yeah, that's the biggest
Huge.
challenge, I
I
think.
think the distinguish between that performance zone and the learning zone, and actually setting the intention to get into that learning zone more often so that we don't plateau, or so that we can make it out of a plateau when we realize we're in one. That's fantastic. And I'd love to hear you explain or kind of relate that terrain wise for people wanting to get into the learning zone more often. Say, for example, I'm usually a blue trail rider in my neck of the woods. And that's where I ride when I'm kind of in that performance zone. I'm, maybe challenging myself in that zone. What kind of terrain should I ride when I'm trying to learn things?
Well, first thing you need to do is to regress to progress. So you need to start looking into what key bike and body movements you will need to tackle the terrain that you are currently struggling with. And usually, basically everything boils down to being balanced in the bike, having pressure control, as in having traction on your wheels, and you achieve that by really being heavily weighted through your feet and feeling that the body is moving. No, the body is stable and the bike is moving. So separating the bike from the body. And the best way to practice this, to be honest, is on isolated obstacles. So for example, a single roll down, maybe even in the city, a single step down, or obstacles like curbs where you can roll over and practice the absorption using your body as your natural suspension, or braking on a even straight gravel road, braking to complete stop and dismounting. So these are all, for example, skills that I do share on my YouTube channel as well, because they are so existential, they are so essential and so fundamental for every rider. And to know that what differentiates an amazing rider from an intermediate rider or a beginner rider is actually just having those fundamentals perfected and then building other skills on it, and not doing it vice versa. Once you've understood that, that's when fundamentals start to become fun because you start to isolate the obstacles and isolate the key bike and body movements to practice, and then you just go out and you don't even need trails to practice. So you would be doing this on isolated obstacles. As I said, for this I have my fundamentals course online to really bring structure to the training, and the course is actually helpful for no matter how long you've been riding, because you will understand the biomechanics of riding, and also the why to and the how to separate the bike from the body by applying certain principles of physics and biomechanics, and then adhering to them, and how you can feel if you're doing it right or not.
Yeah, totally. So many important bits of information you mentioned there. I love it. And it's such a great thing, this idea of taking the particular skill or particular move you're looking to learn for the trails away from the trails where there's no other distractions. You're away from anything that might be scaring you or putting you off. And you're able to really laser focus in on the technique there. Once you've got that dialed, then you're in a position ready to take it back to practice on the trails. I love that. So definitely recommend people check out your fundamentals course there, no matter where they are in the world. And it also makes practicing a whole lot easier, doesn't it? When we don't actually have to get our bike and go to the trails, especially if we live a little distance away, we're able to find other features and other terrain that's just in the vicinity of our neighborhood and get some practice time in. I love that. I'm going to be respectful of your time and start winding things down. I know it's getting a little late there for you, but I know there's so many people out there that look up to you in the mountain biking world, people that are watching your YouTube channel and people like myself that have done coaching with you. But I wanted to ask you, is there anyone that you look up to in the mountain biking world?
There's not one person in specific, but I would say I look up to every person who has the courage to show vulnerability and who is 100% authentic out there, because that is, I think, in today's world where everything is about fitting in and about being someone you may not want to be. I think the most courageous thing is to be 100% yourself and to find that, I'd say, heartfelt wisdom. So I look up to every person who has that courage.
That's a great answer. I love that. Fantastic. I know we've taken this conversation in so many different directions, and I've learned so much out of it. But I'm curious, if there was one takeaway, what's the one thing that you hope listeners learn from this conversation?
I truly hope that they just listen again and find their biggest takeaway, and that they write it down by hand in their journal, which they hopefully start now.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a great one. I know I definitely benefit a lot when I listen to conversations like these over and over again. We'll hear little chunks of information differently the second time around. And like you say there, writing it down in a journal is really going to help us internalize that information and hopefully take action on it as well. Thank you so much, Roxy, for taking the time to sit down with me today. It's been such a great conversation and such an insightful conversation. So thank you for your time. And be sure to share with us your new course when it comes out. I'll definitely put links to your YouTube, your Instagram, and your website there in the show notes. Is there anything else you wanted to add here before we wrap things up?
No, absolutely not. It was such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm looking forward to our next talk, maybe in a few years.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't wait till the time we chat next. Have a great time winding down, learning, riding your bike there on the island. And I can't wait to hear from you soon. What's up, guys? Just one more thing before you hit the trails. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to subscribe and don't be a stranger. I'd love to hear from you about any topics or particular episodes that you enjoyed, and even about any mountain bikers that you'd love to hear me have on the show in the future. You can find me on Instagram at _mind_mountain. This podcast, mountain biking, and mindset are all things that are very, very close to my heart. So I feel super grateful to be able to share these conversations with you. Thank you all for listening. That's all for now. Big love to you all, and I'll see you next time.